Okay, so let me also begin by congratulating Sudhir for this wonderful book, timely book. Two things about the book and then some questions. So one, writing a book as the movement is unfolding, I think is a very difficult task, and Sudhir has done it, accomplished by being on the ground as things were unraveling, capturing, through his ethnographic work. The second good aspect of the book is that it doesn't mince words in terms of its perspective. It's a very pro-farmer book. He doesn't think that there are issues and things of that kind, but the slant in the book is very clearly taking a pro-farmer view and projecting farmers' movement as something very important, both in terms of the agrarian issues, also in terms of the way it challenged the political regime. I think it was the first movement of its kind in the last one decade of populist authoritarian regime, a movement that really made the regime go back on at least on the farm laws, but that gave an opening to many of us to the kind of spaces it opened. So I think Sudhir's book captures all of those things. But any big event of this kind, such a tumultuous event of this scale that happened, I think always leaves behind, at least for a political theorist like me, very deep questions of political agents and how one should approach politics. They sometimes bring forth some very fundamental questions to the foreground. Sudhir's book does touch upon but breezes through many of them. So I will try and bring his attention back to little more in-depth analysis. I think there is a need to really analyze farmers' movement in some depth to understand why it's such a significant event that happened when nobody was able to challenge a regime which was looking near complete cultural hegemony. I think farmers were the one who could shake the roots of I think a lot of things that followed may not be directly traceable, but I think farmers' movement left a lot of impact. So some of those questions I will try and raise for Sudhir's attention as to one, I think the question of power of narratives. I think a lot of populist hegemony was based on the power of narratives. That narratives and performance, we were being told that post-populism, narratives and performance became central to political mobilization, and it was successfully happening. That everything that this regime would touch upon, the kind of cultural codes, cultural narratives, it did have a lot of resonance, in terms of the civilizational resonance and things of that kind. I think farmers' movement threw a big spanner in that, because the regime did try to narrativize farmers' movement too, did try to narrativize things around farmers' movement and narrativize things to the farmers. Both of them did not work. The fact that they were trying to inform farmers about, the 3 farm laws were for farmers' benefits, they were for greater productivity, they would double the income of the farmers. The question that really one should ask is that what is it in the sociology of the agrarian relations when especially compared with urban middle classes? Why do narratives so quickly and easily get fixated with the middle classes? But the farmers were simply not willing to listen. I remember because we were all so closely watching the farmers' movement on news. On one occasion, there was a farmer who said, मैं मोदी जी को इतना कहना चाहता हूँ, हमको जितना पीटना है पीट लो, लेकिन उसके बाद ये काला कानून वापस ले लो. There was absolute clarity on what the regime would do. They came fully prepared that this is not a short-term battle. They knew fully well that it will take a hell of a lot of persuasion, hell of a lot of sacrifice to make the regime push back these laws. Whatever came in between, aap kisan ho, we are having they had 12 rounds of negotiations. God only knows what transpired in those. But the optics outside were to say that the government was very persuasive, it was very reasonable. So the usual thing that happened under Modi's regime is persuasion is followed by coercion. That we look reasonable, you are unreasonable. This is happening with
खुशनुमा माहौल में मीटिंग हुई है.
हाँ.
खुशनुमा माहौल में मीटिंग हुई है.
हाँ. So this goes with religious minorities, the same logic. that we are reasonable, but our neighbors are not reasonable. So my first question would be, given the corporate media, given near control over narratives of this regime, why did they not work with the farmers, right? It did not work with what farmers thought, did not work what people thought about the farmers. Both ways, I think that's I feel is the biggest breakthrough that farmers movement gave us under the first breakthrough. Second question would be, this very tricky relation. Sudhir, you very briefly touch on this, but I wish you had dealt a little more in depth, is this relation between farmers' protests and electoral outcomes. I mean, it's still a puzzle to me that Punjab, Haryana, parts of Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, on the social front, question Sachin on social and political. This is going to haunt you rest of your life, all of you. We dealt with this in class in detail. On the social front, farmers' movement had such a deep impact on social dynamics, but these movements look so weak when it comes to electoral outcomes, including in Lakhimpur Kheri, where farmers were mowed down. BJP wins all the 5 Vidhan Sabha seats. 8. This is something amazing. This really startles me, that what possibly explains this deep divide in Indian politics. And this is not just about the farmers' movement. This, I think, stands good for all forms of social activism. And Mandip, this should interest you. Medha Patkar contests Mumbai, loses badly. Irom Sharmila, 16 years force-fed on strike, contests assembly elections. You know how many votes she got? 200. 200. Just imagine. So there is something in the popular psyche, there is something in the popular imagination of politics in India, where social activism is good when it happens on the social front, but when it comes to electoral politics, the same people think these are misfits. This also, I think, has very deep roots in terms of popular imagination of how power works in India. People, I think in 2 different registers. अच्छे इंसान हो, good, but be in the social domain. Politics से आपका काम नहीं है. Politics कुछ और, something else. Politics is about something else. Politics is not about being good. So Kisan are good, well-meaning, can talk about farmers, but people are not convinced that farming issue, when even farmers at some point decide to even go in for electoral campaigns. Tikayat at one stage said we'll also do that campaign, but that did not work. So this, I think, is a very, very deep question, which is not just about with the farmers' movement, but I think this went all through. The only exception in the history of the social and political divide, I think, is the Singur movement in West Bengal. Again, this is a very interesting question to pitch, that why in Singur in West Bengal, Samim, you should answer this, that is a similar protest of farmers, similar issue of land, similar issue of industries taking over land, but Singur managed to breach CPM's stronghold. Singur had an unabated impact on the political transformation of political regime, while farmers' movement, I think, was much larger in scale, the 2021, but it had no impact. So these are, I think, very intriguing questions on Indian politics. How could one change the complete regime, transform the face of politics in West Bengal, but entire North India Hindi heartbelt was in one way or the other engulfed in farmers' movement. There are such large numbers in terms of even crude number and numerical population count, but they come back with no. Is that caste that explains this fracture? Is it the ethnic divides? I mean, one can go on and on, or between class divides. So that's, I have my hunch, but I will leave it to Sudhir to come back. Third question, which I myself have written on this, is this provocative comparison between farmers' movement and anti-CA movement. A lot of people were unhappy with this. Sir, why are you comparing? दोनों तो victim है, तो victim तो सभी है इस देश में, but फिर भी compare करना पड़ता है. That why farmers' movement won this battle of pushing back the 3 Kala Kanun, but anti-CA movement failed. Well, a lot of them, when I wrote in Wire and Telegraph and other places, a lot of quick rejoinders. I got about half a dozen quick rejoinders, and they said, you're comparing apples and oranges. Muslims are greater victims, are more outsiders. Here are rich farmers who are more powerful, and all kinds of things. But all of those I still feel are very ad hoc responses. Farmers movement, my provisional, and so that I would be, and even Mandeep, if you should come in, because you have seen on the ground, that going by Lucknow's classical formulation, any hegemony needs largest drawing of equivalence, all fragmented social demands. I think farmers movement did that. It began with the question of MSP, but it expanded. They went into food sovereignty. They linked the question of sovereignty and food. They said, no farmer, no food. Then they linked at the third or fourth stage. I remember they were raising placards of Bhima Koregaon activists. They were linking farmers' protest to corporate model of development. They even linked farmers' protest to freedom of expression and intellectual freedom in universities. They said if intellectuals cannot speak, who will raise our set of issues? This is the equivalence. This is a very classical Lucknowian sense. Fragmented social demands were brought under one kind of an hegemony. I would argue that anti-CA precisely failed to do that. Somewhere it got reduced to the question of one kind of citizenship demand. Somewhere in the optics of it, because people might say this was a Muslim religious question, but I would draw your attention, even in the farmers' movement, the religious angle was very, very strong. It was being continuously projected as a Sikh movement. It was continuously being projected as a pro-Khalistani movement. The same kind of communal polarized narrative was working. The Nishant, what is that? That flag. What? Nishan Sahib flag incident that happened. You point to that in your book. That was clearly an attempt to narrativize, to communally polarize. So this question I think we need to raise, that why did it succeed, that kind of polarized imagination with anti-CA protests, but did not succeed with farmers. That farmers movement was also at one stage being depicted heavily as a secessionist movement. There was a pro-Khalistani, that guy hoisting the flag. There was also a question of diaspora Muslims coming in. Of course, it had the long-term impact with Canada and all this. Lawrence Bishnu. I think there's all those continuities exist because the agenda was to narrativize in a way. It was Sikh versus Hindu narrative, subtext did exist even. So that cannot be possible in explanation. That many who wrote rejoinders explained that you cannot compare religious polarized divide with Sikh, which was a social demand. So, this question I think remains that religious polarized narrative did exist even with farmers' movement, and it did not work. My fourth point, is about my own surveys in Haryana. And this, I think, goes a lot in contrary. I visited Haryana post the results when it was lost, and I was quite taken aback. And I thought it's quite an intriguing case of farmers' movement having had no impact. And what I found was quite startling, that what looked like a transformative farmers' movement to us from Delhi became the movement of Jats when I went to Haryana. So it was the anger against Jat domination in Haryana which was being generated. And I think, in my understanding, it was a very calibrated move on the part of the region. That what looked like a very transformative pro-farmer, pro-small farmer and all these narratives. But when I landed in Haryana and I did 2-day survey and interaction with primarily Dalit and Bahujans, lower end caste groups in Haryana, they said, sir, ye movement to Amir logon ka. And they gave a very good example. They said, बताइए कौन 2 साल तक बॉर्डर पे बैठ सकते, जिसके पास समय हो और जिसके पास पैसा हो. ये पैसे वालों का स्ट्रगल है ज़्यादा पैसे के लिए, हमारा इससे कोई लेना देना नहीं है. And that successfully polarized the Haryana election. It was a polarization against the anti-Jat polarization. And then many of us miss this dimension in terms of how Haryana movement and farmers movement played out in Haryana. And as I said, that I wouldn't be surprised if it was a very well calibrated move by the political regime, keeping Haryana elections in mind. And people told me very interesting things. That they said that when I spoke to Jats, they said, sir, we are being victimized by the same methods that Muslims have been victimized. Same kinds of strategies, narratives used against Muslims are today being used against Haryanas. And then they gave this example that Bollywood movies में पिछले 10 साल में 2 ही विलन मिलेगा आपको, एक मुसलमान, दूसरा हरियाणवी बोलने वाला, दूसरा तीसरा विलन कोई है ही नहीं. And he said that the same set of strategies have been used against. This was the Jat response. My final point is that I made a third visit to Haryana to speak to these Jats post all of this and to farm leaders, and they made very interesting point. They said that this movement we cannot succeed now without Jat Dalit alliance. And they said that we are willing to work in CAPS under Dalit leadership. We are willing to give women more space in CAPS. So this, I think, also gives us a new way to study protest politics in India. That protest politics today, and this stands good for all protest movements, that you cannot challenge the dominant hegemony today without linking it to internal reforms, your own political subjectivity. I think this is the success story of how populists have thrown a new challenge. You cannot talk about protest politics in old registers, that we mass movement karenge, sabko saath laenge. No, I think they will continue, populists will refer to power dynamics within. So I think it was stellar on the part of farmers in Haryana to realize this point and say that the only way we can counter this new hegemony is by internally democratizing ourselves, that we are willing to work. And I went with the Chotu Ram's annual function, and there one of the speakers was from Bamsef. Dalit women and Jat, the farmers leaders, were speaking together on the same platform, and they said that the future to seize would be Jat, Dalit and women alliance. I think this gives us a new clue that including religious minorities, I think the new modes of political protest would be, I think they are now inextricably linked, that internal reform and internal questions of political subjectivity are now part of the way we are going to study protest politics. Thank you.